Have you ever had that feeling where you've built something you're incredibly proud of brick by brick, only to have someone who's supposed to care about you look at it and just wrinkle their nose? Not because it's bad or failing, but just because it's not what they would have built. It's a special kind of frustrating. It's the kind of quiet, simmering conflict that doesn't explode, it just poisons the air one family dinner at a time. For me, that's been my reality for the last 2 years. My name is Jasper Jackson, I'm 27 years old, and this is the story of how my in-laws' disapproval became the best motivation I ever had. My story really starts 5 years ago. I was 22, fresh out of university, with a degree that was, let's call it general. I didn't have a clear path. My parents were supportive, but their philosophy was always, find what you love and figure out how to get paid for it. So I did. I fell head over heels into a digital profession, a blend of creative thinking and technical skill. It's not something you can easily explain to your grandparents. There's no simple, one-word answer like doctor or accountant. And I loved that. I loved being on the cutting edge. I dove in head first, spending my own money on certifications, staying up until 3 a.m, teaching myself new software, and taking on tiny freelance projects for almost no pay just to build a portfolio. I was building my own ladder, rung by painful rung. Within a year, it started to pay off. I landed a junior position at a great company. It wasn't glamorous and the pay wasn't incredible, but it was my start. For the next few years, that was my life. I poured everything I had into my career. I was passionate, I was learning, and I was genuinely happy. Right around the time I was starting to feel some real momentum, I met my spouse. From the moment we met, she just got it. She saw the fire in my eyes when I talked about my work. She didn't need me to have a fancy traditional title to see the value in what I was doing. She saw the effort, the dedication, and the future I was trying to build for us. She became my biggest cheerleader. When I was doubting myself, she was the one reminding me of how far I'd come. We were a team. So 2 years ago, when I was 25, we got married. It was the happiest day of my life. And that's when I officially inherited my in-laws. I want to be clear. My in-laws are not bad people. They're products of a different generation, one where success had a very narrow, well-defined look. You became a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. You got a job with a pension and a gold watch at retirement. Their world is one of brick and mortar of tangible, predictable stability. My world, the world of digital careers and remote work. It's like a foreign language to them. It's abstract, it's flimsy. In their eyes, it's not a real job. The first time I noticed was at their house for Sunday dinner, maybe a month after the wedding. My father-in-law was asking everyone about their week. My brother-in-law, who's in finance, talked about a big deal his firm closed. Everyone nodded approvingly. My sister-in-law, a teacher, shared a heartwarming story about a student. My mother-in-law beamed. Then it was my turn. I started explaining a project I was really excited about. I was proud of it, but as I was talking, I could see the light just fade from their eyes. My father-in-law gave a tight, polite smile and said, "Well, that's interesting, Jasper. As long as it pays the bills, I suppose." Then he immediately turned to my wife and asked her about something completely unrelated. I was left hanging, my enthusiasm deflating like a popped balloon. My wife squeezed my hand under the table, a silent signal of support. But the message from them was clear. What I did was a footnote. And so it began. The low-grade, constant hum of their disapproval. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. At Christmas, my mother-in-law would pull my wife aside just loud enough for me to overhear and ask, "Is Jasper still happy with his little computer job? I just worry about you two." The implication was always there. My career was a ticking time bomb, a phase I would hopefully grow out of before it ruined her daughter's life. It wasn't about the money. My wife and I were doing perfectly fine. They knew that. This was about prestige. They couldn't go to their country club and brag that their son-in-law was a senior data visualization architect. It didn't have the same weight, the same satisfying thud as doctor. My career was an unknown quantity, and they hated unknowns. My father-in-law's favorite tactic was the backhanded compliment. He'd see an article about some tech startup failing and say, "See, it's a volatile world out there, Jasper. You're lucky you've managed to hang on." It wasn't encouragement. It was a warning, a reminder that in his mind my foundation was built on sand. He'd introduce me to his friends, not by my name, but with a vague, dismissive wave of his hand. "This is my daughter's husband. He works with computers." It made me feel small, like I had to constantly justify my own existence. Through it all, my wife was my rock. She would gently correct them. "Dad Jasper is incredibly good at what he does." Or she'd shut down my mother-in-law's worries with a firm, "Mom, we are fine. Our future is secure. Please stop." We were a unified front, and that made all the difference. But it was exhausting. Every family gathering became a performance where I'd brace myself for the inevitable comments and count the minutes until we could leave. I tried everything to win them over. I'd explain my industry in simple terms. I'd share major milestones, a big project, launch a raise. I thought if I could just show them the concrete proof of my success, they'd have to accept it. But it was like throwing rocks into a fog. The evidence just vanished, and their opinion remained unchanged. My success wasn't real to them because it didn't fit their definition of success. This pattern continued for 2 years. It was a constant, subtle pressure that we learned to manage. I told myself their opinion didn't matter. I had my wife's support. I had my own passion. I was successful on my own terms. But if I'm being honest, a part of me was desperate for their validation, for them to just once look at me and say, "We were wrong. You've done well." I'm not sure why it held so much weight, but it did. It was a small, persistent ache in the background of my otherwise happy life, and I had no idea that this quiet tension was about to boil over. The boiling point came 6 months ago. It was my in-laws' wedding anniversary, and we were at a restaurant that was far too expensive for the amount of joy in the room. It was one of those places with white tablecloths so starched they could probably cut you and waiters who moved with a silent, unnerving grace. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and unspoken resentments. For the first hour, things were deceptively pleasant. We talked about the weather, a recent vacation they took, the baffling plot of a movie everyone had seen. It was the usual dance, a carefully choreographed performance of a happy family, and I was playing my part perfectly. My father-in-law, a man who wore his success like a tailored suit, was holding court. He'd just finished a story about a golf game with a colleague, a partner at a major law firm. And that was his opening. I should have seen it coming. He swirled the deep red wine in his glass, looked at it like he was divining the future, and then fixed his gaze on me. "You know, Jasper," he began, his voice calm and deliberate. "I was talking with Frank today. His son David just made partner, 31 years old. Can you imagine the boy's set for life? Real stability, a career with a future." I just nodded, taking a slow sip of water. "That's great for him," I said, trying to steer the conversation into a dead end. But he wasn't having it. This wasn't a story. It was a preamble to an execution. My mother-in-law chimed in, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "It's just wonderful to see young people building something solid, something you can count on. We just worry, you know. We want our daughter to have that security." My wife, sitting beside me, stiffened. She placed her hand on my knee, a small anchor in a rising tide. "Mom, we've talked about this. We are secure. Jasper is amazing at what he does." Her defense was like a shield, but my father-in-law treated it like a minor inconvenience. He waved his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Honey, we know he's a smart boy. No one is questioning that, but this computer thing he does, it's a gamble. It's a young man's game. What happens when you're 40, 50? What's the path? Where's the pension? Where's the corner office with your name on the door?" I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. I opened my mouth to explain for the 100th time the structure of my industry, the growth potential, the very real and tangible success I was already having. But he cut me off. He leaned forward, his elbows on that starched white tablecloth, and the polite facade he always wore just melted away. What was left was cold, hard, and utterly dismissive. "Jasper," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "We're not saying this to be cruel. We're saying this because we love our daughter, and by extension we care about you. It's been 2 years. The honeymoon is over. It's time to be a man. It's time to stop this hobby and get a real career." The word hung in the air between us. Hobby. 5 years of my life. The late nights studying for certifications after I'd already graduated from university. The freelance projects I took on for peanuts just to build a portfolio. The gut-wrenching anxiety of interviews. The thrill of landing my first real job in the field. I had chosen the one I had built for myself from the ground up. All of it, in his eyes, was a hobby. Like building model airplanes in the basement. The sound in the restaurant seemed to fade away. I could feel the eyes of the other diners on us, or maybe that was just my paranoia. My fork felt impossibly heavy in my hand. I looked across the table at him, at this man who had decided my entire professional identity was a childish pastime, and for the first time I didn't feel the need to justify myself. I just felt a profound, crystal-clear anger. Before I could say a word, my wife spoke, and her voice wasn't gentle or correcting. It was steel. "Stop," she said. Not loudly, but with a force that cut through everything. Both of her parents turned to look at her, genuinely surprised. "Just stop. Dad, that was one of the most insulting things you have ever said. And Mom, your worry is not helpful. It's undermining. Jasper's career is not a hobby. It's our life. It's our future. It pays our mortgage and it makes him happy. He has built more in 5 years with his hobby than many people do in a lifetime with their real jobs." She turned to me, her eyes locking with mine. "His success is my success," she said, her voice unwavering. "His happiness is my happiness, and I will not sit here and let you tear him down just because you can't brag about him at the country club. We are a team, and you are either on our team or you are against it. There is no in between, so you need to decide." The silence that followed was absolute. My father-in-law looked like he'd been slapped. He leaned back in his chair, his mouth slightly agape. My mother-in-law just stared down at her plate, her face flushed. My wife had just drawn a line in the sand so deep and so clear that no one could pretend they didn't see it. She then picked up her purse, stood up, and looked at me. "We're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. I stood up, threw a $100 bill on the table to more than cover our share, and followed her out of the restaurant. We didn't say a word as we walked through the parking lot. We didn't speak as I drove us away from the curb. I drove for 10 minutes in complete silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the scene replaying in my head on a loop. Hobby. It's time to be a man. Finally, she reached over and put her hand on my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I pulled the car over into a quiet, empty parking lot and turned off the engine. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. "I've never been more proud of you than I was tonight," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Thank you." "There's no need to thank me," she said, moving closer. I meant every word. It's you and me. That's the only team that matters. We sat there for a long time, just processing. I was still angry. I was hurt. I was wounded that the man whose daughter I loved could think so little of me. But underneath the anger, something else was starting to form. It was a cold, hard little ember of an idea. They had done more than just insult me. They had given me a gift. They had laid down a gauntlet. They thought my career was a joke, a temporary phase, a foundation of sand. They had explicitly demanded that I give it up. They had told me to my face that I wasn't a real man with a real career. And in that moment, in the quiet of the car with my wife's hand in mine, the insult began to transform. The sting of the words started to fade, and what was left was not pain, but pure, unadulterated fuel. It was like they had handed me a map and pointed to a mountain saying, "You will never, ever be able to climb this." And I thought, oh, really, just watch me. Their disapproval was no longer a fog I had to navigate. It was a target. Their doubt was no longer a weight on my shoulders. It was a whetstone to sharpen my ambition. They wanted me to change my career. Fine, I would change it. I would pour every ounce of my energy, every late night, every early morning, into becoming so undeniably successful that their opinion would become a laughable, pathetic footnote in the story of my life. I wasn't going to do it to win their approval. That ship had sailed, crashed on the rocks, and sunk to the bottom of the sea. I was no longer seeking their validation. No, this was different. I was going to succeed out of spite. I was going to build an empire on the foundation they called sand, and I was going to make sure they had a front row seat to watch me do it. I started the car again, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. My wife saw it and smiled back, a knowing look in her eyes. She understood completely. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I looked at her, the anger in my chest now replaced by a cold, thrilling sense of purpose. "I'm thinking," I said, "that your father just gave me the best motivation of my entire life. The war wasn't over. In fact, it had just been officially declared. But they had made a critical mistake. They thought they were dictating the terms of my surrender. They had no idea they had just handed me the terms of my victory, and I was going to spend the next 6 months making sure it was absolute. The next 6 months were a blur of focus and fury. Every morning my alarm went off an hour earlier. Every night I stayed at my desk an hour later. The anger from that dinner became my pre-workout. The memory of my father-in-law's condescending smirk became my second cup of coffee. His words, "It's a hobby," became a mantra that I repeated every time I felt like slowing down. My wife was my rock. She was the one who would quietly place a fresh cup of coffee on my desk at 11 p.m. without a word. She was the one who would intercept calls from her parents, keeping their casual negativity from ever reaching my ears. We had a new code. If she came into my home office and said, "I just got off the phone with the motivators," we'd share a dark little laugh, and it would push me to work even harder. Our marriage, which they had tried to use as leverage, became a fortress. Inside its walls, we were a team of two united against the world. At work, the change was noticeable. I wasn't just completing my assignments anymore, I was destroying them. I started volunteering for the most difficult projects, the ones everyone else avoided. I sought out problems, reverse engineered them, and presented solutions my bosses hadn't even thought to ask for. I was running on pure, high-octane spite, and it was the most powerful fuel I'd ever known. My passion for my work, which had always been there, was now sharpened to a razor's edge by my singular goal to become so successful that their opinion of me would be rendered utterly and completely irrelevant. The whispers started about 4 months in. My team lead began pulling me into higher-level meetings. My director started asking for my opinion on departmental strategy. The seeds I had been planting not just for the last 6 months, but for the entire 5 years of my career were finally starting to break through the soil. The pressure that was meant to crush me was instead creating a diamond. Then 1 week ago it happened. I was called into my director's office. My heart was pounding, but it was a steady, confident rhythm. I sat down across from him, and he slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an official offer letter. My name was on it, followed by a new title, Senior. It came with a whole new bracket of responsibilities, a team to mentor, and a salary increase that made my eyes go wide. This wasn't just a step up. This was a leap. In my field, at my company, making Senior in 5 years was fast. It was proof of expertise, dedication, and value. It was tangible. It was undeniable. It was the absolute validation of the path I had chosen for myself when I was 22 years old. I looked at the letter and I didn't see the numbers or the new title. I saw my father-in-law's face at that dinner table. I heard his dismissive tone, and a wave of cold, calm victory washed over me. I had climbed the mountain they told me I couldn't. I accepted on the spot. I shook my director's hand, walked out of his office, and went straight to my car. The first person I called was my wife. When I told her, she just screamed with joy. There was no, "I told you so," only an overwhelming tide of pride and happiness for us. We agreed to have a proper celebration that weekend, just the two of us. But as the initial euphoria began to settle over the next couple of days, something else took its place. The war was won, but there had been no final battle. The enemy had fired their shot 6 months ago, and I had just silently, and from a great distance, won the entire campaign. It didn't feel quite finished. I had done this for myself, for my wife, for my own pride. But the initial spark had come from them, and that deserved to be acknowledged. So 72 hours ago, I went to a generic supermarket. I walked down the greeting card aisle past the colorful birthday wishes and the heartfelt anniversary messages. I found what I was looking for in the most boring section, a simple plain off-white card. On the front, in simple black script, it just said, "Thank you." It was perfect. That evening, I sat down at my desk with the card and a good pen. I thought about what to write for a long time. I could have been vicious. I could have been cruel. I could have listed my accomplishments and thrown them in their faces, but that wasn't the point. True victory isn't loud. It's quiet, it's precise. So I wrote, "Dear mother-in-law and father-in-law, I hope you are both doing well. I'm writing to you with some good news. I was recently promoted to a senior position at my company. It was a wonderful moment, and it felt like the culmination of 5 years of hard work in a career that I love. As I was reflecting on the journey that led to this promotion, I found myself thinking about our dinner together 6 months ago. I especially wanted to thank you for your career advice. It turned out to be the single greatest motivation I've ever received. All the best, Jasper." 1 sentence, that's all it took. Perfectly polite, utterly devastating. It was a thank you note for the insult, a declaration of victory disguised as a gesture of gratitude. I read it to my wife, and she just stared at me for a moment before a slow, wicked grin spread across her face. "Oh, that is perfect," she whispered. I sealed the envelope, put a stamp on it, and dropped it in a public mailbox the next morning. And I paid a little extra for tracking. Which brings us to right now. About 10 minutes ago, I got an email notification on my phone. I opened it up, and there it was in crisp digital text. "Your item has been delivered." It's sitting in their mailbox right now. Or maybe it's on their kitchen counter. Maybe my father-in-law is opening it as we speak, expecting a simple note of family news. He'll read the first part and nod, maybe feeling a flicker of surprise or even pride. And then he'll get to that last sentence. He'll probably read it twice. He will understand in that one quiet moment that he didn't just fail to knock me down. He was the one who taught me how to fly. I'm standing in my living room. My wife, my partner in all things, is pulling a bottle of champagne from the fridge. She sees me looking at my phone and just smiles because she knows. The loop is closed. The score is settled. At 27 years old, I'm a senior in a career. I built myself with a wife who is my true family and a future that is bright and entirely my own. They thought they were writing the end of my story. They had no idea they were just writing the introduction to my victory speech. And the best part is I never have to say another word about it. The card says it all.